We are continuing our ICF credentialing series, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into one specific topic, which is getting your ICF credential approved with non-ICF classes. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about what you need to know in order to even attempt this process, which is also known as the portfolio path. Diana, where do we start for someone that has taken non-ICF classes, they're looking at getting an ICF credential, and they're like, oh, I got to start over. But that's not entirely true.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things is people often don't realize that this path exists. So oftentimes I'll have someone who comes to me and who says, okay, I'm taking my level 1 or I'm taking my level 2. One of the first questions I asked as a mentor was, were you trained as a coach before? So if you were trained as a coach before, for a minimum of 30 hours, has to be live training usually, or mostly live training, there's a chance that you may want to go down the portfolio path. It used to really frustrate me that there would be coaches getting certified at the ACC level who I knew should be at the PCC level. You can pull out your certificates, you can pull out your manuals. We'll talk about the details today, but I just want to present this as an option. And the reason that this is so important is for your ICF credential, your coaching hours, which are the hours that you spend coaching clients, only count day 1 of your ICF approved training. The exception to that is if you took training, let's say like myself, I was trained as a coach in a non-ICF program in 2005. My ICF approved training didn't start till 2010. So if I hadn't gone the portfolio path, I would not have been able to count all the coaching hours I had since 2005. So that's why this is important. It can make the difference between who's pursuing ACC versus PCC.
One of the first things that most people bring up is, how do I know if my coaching actually counts? A lot of this comes from, in years prior, there was a lot of different schools, something like coactive coaching, which is now actually a part. They're attached to the ICF. If you've gone through training something like coactive, it makes sense that you can kind of say, okay, well, now that they're approved with ICF, I can easily see how that could apply here. But if I went to a different school that's not one of these big ones, how am I going to know if my specific training is actually going to qualify?
Yeah. So first and foremost, look at your certificate, which if your certificate has the acronym ACSTH or ACTP, if it was a long time ago, level 1, level 2, level 3 didn't exist. So it's going to say ACSTH or ACTP. If it has an acronym like that, your training was ICF approved. Even if it says CCE, it's worth taking a look at. If it doesn't have one of those acronyms or it doesn't say ICF approved anywhere, I still recommend you go to the website and see if they are now ICF approved. Some programs don't choose that. There's a lot, for example, there's different like John Maxwell, Tony Robbins, Brene Brown. We have famous coaches who aren't pursuing ICF credentialing, but if you can look at so I think first and foremost, you check to see if they have been ICF approved and maybe you just didn't know it at the time. But then otherwise, take a look and see it's time to get out your syllabus. Take a look at how many hours you were in live training as a coach.
Yeah, the last thing is that if it's none of these approvals, so it's not someone that was previously not approved and now they're attached like coactive, is consider the content on what you were actually taught. Is it about marketing? Is it about your Facebook group? Is it about how to engage in sales calls? That's not stuff that's necessarily, if the whole class or certification is about that, that's not what's going to qualify. If it's about asking powerful questions, if it's about creating an environment and container for the client, if it's about engaging with them, not in consultation, but in pulling things out of them, even if it was not ICF approved, it may still be something that qualifies, which is why you want to start looking at what the curriculum is, what the syllabus was, what the handouts are, because in order to start the portfolio process, the ICF is going to want some documentation. Diana, what do you know about the documentation that the ICF requires in order to say something that's not attached at all to get to qualify for the portfolio path?
So what the ICF is looking for with this documentation is first and foremost, the 30-hour thing. I don't know if the 30-hour thing is written down anymore. It may not still hold. However, it's essentially a bulk of training. And this can also be training over time. If you trained over a year, for myself, we worked at a company. So we had 2 weeks of initial training and then we had training after that. To Jacen's point, can you match some of the content to the ICF ethics and the core competencies? Was it live? The documentation that the ICF requires has changed over time. So a couple years ago, it was actually something where you had to say what was live and what wasn't live, and you had to map it to each core competency. More recently, I've just uploaded a training manual from the company that I worked at, and coaches have gotten approved without us giving a lot of specifics. We just uploaded the whole manual. So I think one of the things is to look at the materials you have. If you don't have materials from your program, it's worth reaching out to your program and asking them, are you ICF approved? Do you have documentation that I can get ICF approved? So really, it's going to take some legwork. If you're going the portfolio path, you may be saving thousands of dollars on education, and you may be saving years of time as far as when your coaching clock of client hours actually start.
It's about 50% in person and 50% self-paced. So asynchronous versus synchronous is what they call it. So if you had self-paced homework and then you got together as groups and talked about it and did some demo coaching, that could apply. So it's worth doing the legwork like Diana's talking about in order to get the syllabus, the course materials, the handouts, anything you have to support what you were taught and how that almost crosswalks or aligns with what the ICF core competencies are. Another thing to consider is that right now, you're going to be submitting this as a part of your ICF application. This is something that you're going to have everything together, including your mentoring, your application, your recorded calls. So you can't say, well, let me see if the ICF will take this before I start. Right now, they do state on their website that they don't pre-approve any non-ICF programs.
Yeah, super helpful, Jacen. That's a good point. So the portfolio path, if you've taken a online training only, isn't going to be a path that you can take. The idea is that your coach training should be live. Someone should be listening to you coach. Someone should be teaching you coaching tactics.
Another good thing is at Hawthorne Union, we really try to provide some of this guidance included with our mentoring. Obviously, we're not the only one. So if you are looking to get a mentor, and if that's one of the pieces that have been missing, that's a good time to see if they have any insight into this kind of work about getting this approved. Some people say, though, this is the backdoor approach, but it's known as the portfolio path on the ICF website. And they do have a lot of robust documentation, a lot of samples about the forms you need to fill out, what it looks like actually going through the verification process, and a lot of examples of what would need to be submitted and what kind of documentation you're providing.
Yeah, great. And this is what mentors are for, to also guide you through the process. So we're happy to connect with you and answer questions, but talk to your mentor about this, because while you may decide to take an ICF approved program to up your game, to make sure that your training is current, I have many coaches that I think it's also important to get credit for the things that you did years ago, because on the ACC level, there are some requirements that are different from the PCC level. So it's worth seeing and getting credit for what's available. Also, rules change at the ICF. These requirements change. What you have to turn in changes. And so it's worth kind of potentially getting credit and moving forward with this now before these change again.
I agree. I think it's absolutely worthwhile if you're looking at your coaching tactics, if you're looking at the core competencies and you're saying, hey, I know all this stuff. I know how to really pull powerful insights out of a coaching client, then you're probably a good candidate. If it's really, again, about more of that marketing and that kind of business application, a little bit of that is going to be included in every good coaching training. But if it's focused on that over the actual coaching work, that's where you may want to do a little bit more due diligence.